Well, welcome to the Alden's parlor. We're doing a bit of sewing and we're having some tea, as the Alden ladies certainly would have. And for most of their lives, women in families like the Aldens in rural New England would have been drinking Chinese tea that was being imported to England and then sent over here to the colonies. But at a certain point, people stopped doing that because it became a political issue. So I think we'll start by talking about what kinds of tea they were used to drinking.
So the most common type of tea in the New England area was a black tea called buhi. It was one of the more affordable teas from China just because it was kind of an amalgamation of any tea that the merchants might have left over. It was not as fancy as the Kongu. You can even see there's just a slight difference in the shape of the tea leaves. One of the more high quality teas was also a black tea called suchong, which is smoked, so it smells very much like a campfire. And there was green tea being imported at the time. The highest quality was called young hyson. The tea leaves are a younger version of the black tea and not oxidized the way that these leaves are. So the way you would make tea in the 18th century is you would take these loose leaves and take a teaspoon for every person who was drinking tea. So if Diana and I were having tea together, we would put 2 teaspoons into this teapot, pour the hot water over and let it steep for a while. And then before we poured it into our teacups, we would use a strainer to make sure that none of those tea leaves got into the cup, because you don't actually want to eat the tea leaves very much. And sweetened tea was very popular in New England. I don't think anyone really drank tea without either brown sugar, molasses, or refined white sugar. You could always find sugar in a cone like this. Typically the white sugar would be in the cone, correct?
And even if you were in the poorhouse in Boston, tea was so important that you would receive a ration of that cheap buhi tea and some molasses to put into it, which would be a very strong cup of tea. It would be much nicer to have a loaf of nice white sugar, and you would clip chunks off of that you would put into your tea, much like we would use sugar cubes today. And we do know from travelers' accounts that New Englanders really liked their sugar and apparently had very bad teeth. They thought that the tea caused that. We know that it was probably the sugar. But when people decided that starting in the late 1760s, about 1767, 68, drinking imported tea does become a political issue for the people who were becoming known as the Friends to Liberty or the Whigs, who we would usually call patriots today. And so they decided that as a political gesture, women who wanted to support that political cause could start using herbal substitutes, things that they had probably always been using for medicinal purposes. So we've got chamomile right here. That's in bloom in June at this time of year. That's something that is recorded in newspapers and elsewhere as being used both for medicine and as a political gesture. We've got some mint, that's good for your stomach.
I think this is raspberry leaf.
And raspberry leaves right down here, which is what we're drinking right now. And raspberry is actually very good for women's health, so you could say that has a double purpose. This is lemon balm up here. Lemon balm is actually a mild antidepressant. So perhaps if you were feeling very sad about losing the caffeine component of your tea, you could have some lemon balm. And for women in families like the Aldens that did support the patriot cause, that was an empowering thing. It's the first time that American women ever stepped up to a political cause. They couldn't be firing muskets like the men are outside. And that's also the first record of consumer boycotts ever in Western history that we know of. But there is another side to this because not all women agree with this. Do you want to talk about that?
So there were actually quite a few women merchants in Massachusetts and Boston. If you were a female merchant, you would sell fine goods that you might have helped make, like caps, but also fine silks and fabrics, and of course household goods like tea. So there were a couple sisters in Boston called the Cumming sisters. They were female merchants and continued to sell tea through the Townsend Acts, which was the first set of boycotts or the first acts that influenced the boycotts, and then even after the Boston Tea Party, because they were trying to make a living, and tea was one of the finer goods that you could sell. They didn't particularly have a political stance, but for people who did have a political stance, the fact that they were selling tea was against them. So they actually ran these 2 sisters out of town. The Cummings relocated to Nova Scotia. because they were considered loyalist, and to be a loyalist, especially in Boston, was not an easy thing to be. And even in small towns, it was hard to go against what the very vocal majority or minority was practicing.
And we do know of a female merchant on Cape Cod who was similarly attacked by people in her town. She was actually attacked in the middle of the night and dumped on the other side of the town line, just trying to get her to leave. And even in people did engage in public protests like the Boston Tea Party on a smaller scale in rural places. Some towns like Lexington and actually Marshfield, which has a reputation for being Tory only, actually had tea burnings where people could bring tea from their homes and destroy it publicly. Not everyone would have wanted to do that. So it's definitely an issue that, depending on your position, could be a subject of pride, or it could be a source of suffering.
But probably in the Alden household, if you were drinking tea, it was done in private.
Yes,
and
very secretly.
No one else knew about
without
it.
Dad's permission.